Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Shifting Landscapes, New Approaches to Modern and Contemporary South Asian Art. This webinar is part of Asia Week New York's extended programming this spring. Next month, Asia Week New York will host a 9-day celebration in the city, bringing together top-tier international Asian art galleries, major auction houses, and numerous museums and Asian cultural institutions. It features simultaneous gallery open houses, Asian art auctions, museum exhibitions, lectures, and special events. Participants from Great Britain, China, Hong Kong, Japan, and the United States will unveil an extraordinary array of museum-quality treasures from China, India, the Himalayas, Southeast Asia, Tibet, Nepal, Japan, and Korea. This afternoon, however, our focus will be South Asia. Over the last decade, the global interest in modern and contemporary art from South Asia and its wide diaspora has grown exponentially. Recognition and appreciation from art enthusiasts, collectors, and institutions around the world continues to expand, as does media coverage and the global marketplace for the category. In the subcontinent, new galleries, museums, art fairs, and biennales have added to an increasingly vibrant arts ecosystem, providing much-needed opportunities for its young, expanding population to engage with modern and contemporary art. Internationally, several prominent galleries now represent artists from the region, and notable museums around the world are presenting significant solo and survey exhibitions of their work. Today's panel aims to unpack some of the new and innovative approaches to modern and contemporary South Asian art that have characterized this period of growth, exploring significant changes in the local, regional, and global landscapes of the category, particularly at the institutional level. Perhaps the most important supporter of this growth and evolution of modern and contemporary South Asian art has been the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art, or KNMA, a private museum established in New Delhi by the avid collector Kiran Nadar in 2010. Since it was founded, KNMA has been sharing its impressive collection of South Asian art with audiences around the world through a pioneering program of exhibitions and partnerships. As the museum expands and readies to move into a new, permanent, purpose-built structure, we are pleased to open today's panel with a presentation from Deepanjana Klein, Director of Acquisitions and Development at KNMA, that highlights the museum's evolution, its unparalleled collection, significant international collaborations, and exciting plans for the future. Next, we will hear from Shanay Jhaveri, Head of Visual Art at the Barbican in London, who curated the recent critically acclaimed exhibition, The Imaginary Institution of India, Art 1975 to 1998. The second in a series of collaborations between the Barbican and KNMA, this important show presented works by more than 30 Indian artists from a vital period of change and creativity in the country, and sparked new international engagement and conversations around South Asian art and artists, underlining the importance of partnership in fostering growth and widening audiences. I want to thank both our panelists for joining us this afternoon, and in particular Shanay, who is logging on from London, where it is already quite late in the evening. Before we begin, just a quick reminder. If any members of the audience would like to enter questions that you have for the panelists during their presentations, please use the Q&A link on your screens below, and I will pose them to the panelists once they have completed their presentations. With this, I'd like to hand over to Deepanjana, who will kick off today's discussion.
Thank you, Nishad, for this wonderful introduction. And thank you, Margaret and the Asia Week team for having me as one of the panelists. And thank you, Shanay, for being my co-panelist. It's a long friendship of collaboration, brainstorming, and sharing of art. I'll start by introducing the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art, which Nishad already has done beautifully. But just to reiterate, we are celebrating our 15th anniversary this month. Kiran Nadar, who was our founder and chairperson of the museum, started this museum in January of 2010. And over these 15 years, the collection has grown exponentially. Now we have more than 15,000 works of art in the collection, ranging from classical Indian all the way to modern and contemporary, diaspora, and artists from around the world who have treated India as their muse. We are a museum that is welcoming to all, especially in the case of India, where our biggest challenge is that we do not have a museum-going culture, which is slowly changing, but we still have a long way to go. So our hope is that through our collection, exhibitions, publications, and public programming, we will be that bridge between the arts, artists, and audiences. Now, as a very young institution, taking this big leap to move from a 35,000 square feet space, which we operate out of 3 spaces, to move to a 1 million square foot space over the next 3.5 years, we are grappling with the very rapidly changing landscape of museums around the world. Museums are facing one of the largest paradigm shifts since they became public institutions more than 200 years ago. Traditionally, if a museum deemed an object, such as a piece of art or a historical artifact worthy, the visitor was expected to show reverence for and learn from that object. The information moved in one direction, from the museum to the visitor. This has completely changed in today's museum experience. So when we began, we had, let's say, we were struggling to even bring in students from schools to come to our museum. There's something we are doing right, where today, every week, we have 400 to 500 students coming to the museum. And the biggest driver of change is the audience in this changing landscape in museums. It started out being highly exclusive and elitist. This audience has diversified and expanded at an unprecedented scale, and it is taking ownership of the institution. This shift to having a broad and diverse audience, and the audience that not only feels like not a guest in the museum, but feels that this is their institution and therefore represent their values, that is the biggest transformation. So on the one hand, we are struggling to bring people to the museum, and I think it is pretty much with every museum around the world. No matter what art you have in your collection, if there is no audience, then we as an institution have failed. So all of us across the world are thinking about how to engage with this changing landscape of museum, changing audience, changing expectations. And I'll call it a customer-centered museum now. And I'm using this word in an open-ended way because most of the time when we talk about businesses, we talk about customer service. So a customer-centered museum constantly changes to meet the needs of audiences, resulting in emotionally invested visitors who trust the institution and will remain committed despite market disruptions. The visitor-centered approach also increases the likelihood of local community impact, which is exactly what we are aspiring towards. And I use the word market since as institutions, we are now in competition with other destinations that visitors like to be at: malls, restaurants, cafes, etc. In order for museums to survive and thrive, they need to adapt to a changing market, just like other businesses. Museums now vie for their visitors' attention with other destinations and businesses in an increasingly competitive market space. Museums must adopt the typical customer-centric processes of business to attract visitors and shift the focus from artifacts to the museum visitor experience. Although the missions of museums and businesses are very different, a visitor-centric approach is essential if museums hope to thrive in today's ever-changing world. This is what's keeping us awake all night, every day, till we open the new space. And there are examples of museums that have very successfully made their public spaces to meet just these needs. For example, you have M+ in Hong Kong, where you have free Wi-Fi. There are reading areas where people can gather, hang out, relax, without even having to engage with the art. So as we are looking at and thinking about our new spaces, we are exactly trying to align ourselves with these kinds of examples that are successfully running in different parts of the world. This is not to say that museums are no more the keepers of objects of culture, but the meaning of those objects is shifting to the visitors. Museums are beginning to recognize that meaning is subjective and depends on the visitor's identity, social background, and environment. This is very critical as we go through repatriation, as we go through looking at collections and redefining a collection. And it is the visitor who is making the connection with these objects. Curators are no longer the only important voices. That role must now be shared with the public. Instead of art and artifact warehouses, museums are becoming content warehouses, with the role of providing factual information and context for the visitor to curate. Museums are starting to ask, how can the information we provide become relevant to every visitor? That's the only way we, as a very young institution, can not only be successful, but also stay relevant and keep up with the expectations of the visitor. Now I'm going to share some slides, some visuals of some international collaborations we've done. And the reason we are showcasing Indian and South Asian art around the globe is to build that awareness, to bring in the audiences, not just from India, but from around the world. If we bring our art to you outside of India, we hope that we'll inspire you to come to India, to our museum. Next slide, please. So KNMA maintains global visibility for Indian, South Asian, and artists from diaspora through collaborations with numerous museums and foundations. With over 25 international partnerships in past 14 years, KNMA has collaborated with prominent institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Public Art Fund in New York, Centre Pompidou in Paris, Tate and the Barbican in London, and the Venice Art Biennale. So today I'll show you some of these images, and the reason I start with 2016, the Med Breuer exhibition of Nasreen Mohammadi, is because our collaboration and friendship between two people who are now in two institutions, one is Shanay, my co-panelist, and myself. Shanay started at the Med Breuer, he moved to New York, and in 2016, this was the first collaboration where the Nasreen Mohammadi show had begun at KNMA in New Delhi, moved to Madrid at the Reina Sofia Museum, and then came to the Med Breuer's inaugural show as the only solo exhibition for the inaugural exhibition of Med Breuer. Next, please. This is in 2019, India participated at the Venice Biennale. It was the second time India ever participated at the Biennale, and the Indian government invited our museum to curate the show. So this is just an example of that collaboration with the Indian government. Here I'm showing Jitish Kalat's work, the covering letters. Next. Now, these collaborations have multiple points of entry that encourages curiosity and discovery of not just the arts, but as an institution, who we are and how we are looked at, both within the white cubes of a collaborating institution and museums or other organizations without walls has been our approach for these engagements. The Public Art Fund and the High Line are such institutions in New York City that offer the public an array of experiences without being prescriptive. Therefore, KNMA's collaboration with the Public Art Fund is extremely meaningful. Within India, we are working toward activating dead or public spaces to engage with the public as and how they please. So here we are showcasing, this is in collaboration with the Public Art Fund, we are showcasing Bharti Kher's ancestor, which you'll see her again later. Here she's placed at the entrance of Central Park on 59th Street across from the Apple Store. And she remained there for almost a year for all New Yorkers and visitors to New York City to engage with an artist who is and represents South Asia. Next, please. Similarly, in London, it was a work by Jitish Kallad that we collaborated with the Somerset House. Again, it's in the open for public to engage, public to interact with, public to actually walk around these pieces. And it's interesting to see how our education team, how our outreach team also interacts with the public that comes to these. So we not only showcase the works, but we also actively promote outreach and educational programming in those areas during these exhibitions. And we keep going back to the same place so that we have long-term impact and we touch the students of those regions, just the way we are trying to have and touch the students in India. Next, please. This was a collaboration with the Australian Centre for Contemporary Arts in Melbourne. This is a mid-career retrospective of a very talented artist from India named Meetu Sen. Many of you may be familiar with her works. She's a multimedia artist. And this is an artist we have collected in depth. And it was one of our most important exhibitions where we, as KNMA, we felt we needed to support and be involved as an institutional partner for this exhibition. And it was reviewed as one of the greatest shows in 2023 across the globe. Next, please. So then our friend Shanay moves to London, and so do we with him. And this speaks of friendship through art, through our intellectual involvement and sharing of knowledge, scholarship, and collection. We formed a collaboration with the Barbican, and this was the first exhibition. It was Shanay's first show at the Barbican. He opened it with Ranjani Shettar, and he took on the space, and I'm sure Shanay would be a better person to speak about this. He converted an entire space into this beautiful monument with this beautiful monumental sculptures of Ranjani Shettar. And this was the arboretum with all the trees, and Ranjani was the perfect artist to be representing and complementing that space with her gorgeous pieces. And this exhibition was from September 2023 to June 2024. Next, please. By April, we were in Venice, and as an institution from India, we really feel that India has to have a presence. We believe that India has to have a presence in the global art platform. And therefore, we took it upon ourselves, even if the Indian government did not have an India pavilion, that we would have a prominent presence at the Venice Biennale. And this is a commitment we've made for next 3 to 4 years. We've taken up a space called Magazzini del Sale, right behind Punta della Dogana, which is a very famous museum owned by Pinault. And the first exhibition we've done there was of M.F. Hussain, one of our greatest modernists. and it was an immersive. And why did we choose to show an immersive? Here we were interacting and engaging with a global audience. And in order for us to introduce one of our greatest modern masters, we felt we needed to do not only an exhibition of his physical works, his early works, but also allow the audience to be completely immersed in the world of M.F. Hussain. This exhibition was extremely successful and will be traveling in the next few months to another great institution. We've been invited for that, which we should be able to announce shortly. Next, please. As I had mentioned, we are collaborating with not just White Cube institutions, but also exhibiting with institutions like Public Art Fund. So the Bharti Care you'll see in the far left background, the ancestor, which we saw in New York, is currently on view at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park in the UK. And the latest acquisition from KNMA is the Gin that sits on the right. It's one of Bharti's largest and monumental pieces that she's produced for this Yorkshire Sculpture Park show. And we are honored and delighted to be working with Yorkshire Sculpture Park, bringing South Asian artists to the public. Next, please. This brings me back to Barbican. October 2024, Shanay opened the Imaginary Institution of India. Art 1975, 1998, which he will speak about, but we were thrilled to be the largest lending institution for this exhibition. We came in as the institutional partner for the second time in the year, and we have new news brewing, which I'll let Shanay discuss when he talks about our collaboration. Next, please. This is actually currently on view. This is Huma Bhabha at the Brooklyn Bridge Park. And this is a collaboration we did with Public Art Fund. And those of you who haven't seen it, it is absolutely spectacular. You must go and see it. There are 4 very large monumental works of Huma, who's an artist of Pakistani origin, but lives in New York and one of the greatest sculptors of our time. Next, please. All right, so now this brings me to our new building, KNMA 2.0. So now we have the greatest works, we have amazing collaborators, we have a 1 million square foot museum coming up. What do? We were invited to launch the building at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2023. Now, what is the relevance of what it means to have this 1 million square foot new building in India? And that itself has a very different meaning from what it would mean to have a new museum in the US. This building is currently the largest museum under construction in the world. And as I had started this talk by saying, in India, we are struggling to bring people in. So the founder, as in Kiran Nadar, decided we will make a destination building. So if we build, they will come. And they will come to at least see and engage with the building. And we can entice them to come and see some art while they're in the building. And the reason I said the meaning of having this building is very different from what it would mean to have a new museum in the US is because there are currently more than 95,000 museums in the world. And 35,000 of them are in the United States. More than 850 million people visit American museums annually, greater than the numbers who attend all major sporting events combined. Museums are considered the most trustworthy source of information in the United States. They are rated more highly than local newspapers, nonprofit researchers, the US government, the academic researchers. The large number of visitors and the high level of perceived trustworthiness is a powerful combination, especially in this day and age with the political situation around the globe, we have to take this responsibility very, very seriously. And this is what we need to aspire toward in India as we build a museum-going culture, as we build our new institution, as we get ready to embrace KNMA 2.0, that museums are still archival machines with the purpose of preservation, but how they interact with the public has changed dramatically. This is constantly on our minds. Museums must change from being places containing artifacts requiring expert interpretation to places that provide impactful experiences and emotional connections that lead to life-changing personal insights. They must become agile content creators, able to change as their visitors change. Only if this shift takes place can we as museums remain relevant to the populations that we need to serve in today's rapidly changing world. We are more than a place, a building, a noun, a repository. We are relationships. We are community. We aim to be art and not just see it, to inspire history in the making and not just study it. And I'll end my talk with a quote from an artist, Olafur Eliasson, and he says it beautifully. He describes the museum as, the museum of the future is generous. It nurtures the transformative possibilities inherent in the contact between artwork, audience, museum, and society. A polyphony of voices, actions, and possible encounters. The Museum of the Future is a power that can change the world. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be on this panel. And like Deepanjana, I'd like to extend my thanks to Nishad, Margaret, and the Asia Week team. And it's always a joy to be alongside Deepanjana. And she's so wonderfully spoken about our long-standing friendship and the many conversations that we've had and the projects that it's led to. And today I get to revisit an exhibition that Deepanjana was one of the most vocal champions of and instrumental in helping realize itself. The Imaginary Institution of India, Art 1975 to 1998, which closed at the Barbican in January, so 2 months ago. It was in collaboration with the KNMA Museum of Art in New Delhi. And as Deepanjana outlined, it's one stop on a multi-year partnership journey that we're on with KNMA. The first being Ranjini Shettar's commission for the conservatory. And at the end of the webinar, I will be sharing news about our forthcoming collaboration. So the Imaginary Institution of India, Art 1975 to 1998, was an exhibition that surveyed artistic production from across the Indian subcontinent during a 23-year period marked by social upheaval, economic instability, and rapid urbanization. When I arrived at the Barbican, the impetus to make the show really came from 2 areas. One is that I had noticed that there were a number of ongoing conversations within the field of Indian art history, but even more broadly, that were thinking about how the history of independent India had been periodized. So, of course, 1947, a very significant date, the partition of the country. And then most people would move straight forward to 1991, when the Indian economy was liberalized, and the decades in between somewhat being forgotten. And so kind of shining a light or returning to the 70s and 80s was an impetus. And then the other was a rather simple one, which was that an exhibition of this scale felt very overdue in England and in the United Kingdom. As Nishad mentioned in his opening remarks, that there have been a number of solo monographic exhibitions, but there hasn't been a major group show in the UK at a public institution of the scale of the Imaginary Institution of India since, I would wager, the 1980s. The Imaginary Institution of India had 30 artists and about 150 works, 1/3 of which came from KNMA. And as you can see, the exhibition had two dates in its title, 1975 and 1998. These dates became a framework to really examine a period of 2 decades. 75, it was significant because it was the declaration of the emergency when democratic rights were suspended. And 1998 was when India became a nuclear power, relinquishing its nonviolent ideals to assert its place in a new global order. And what these two dates represented for me were moments where an idea of Indian democracy shifted, changed, or was disrupted. So if we move to the next slide, please. All the artworks in this exhibition combine social observation with individual expression and innovative form, and the friendship, love, desire, family, religion, violence, caste, and community. And what this did was it helped determine 4 axes or themes that ran through the show: gender and sexuality, the rise of communal violence, urbanization and shifting class structures, and a growing connection with indigenism. Now, the exhibition took its title from Sudipta Kaviraj's essay, The Imaginary Institution of India, in which he writes persuasively about the intellectual process of conceptualizing the Indian nation. Artworks considered the state's inability to abide by the progressive character of its constitution, which was conceived as an instrument for radical social transformation. The artworks also confronted government failure to uphold secularism, social justice, welfare, minority rights, and affirmative action. These artists demonstrated that solidarity and protest existed and were expressed in many registers, from the strident to the intimate, from the despondent to the poetic, both anguished and hopeful, and in the street and the home. And so, in the words of B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, and I quote, "Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it social democracy." And so when visitors arrived at the Barbican, they were met by this work by Gieve Patel called Two Men with Handcart from 1979. And I felt that this work really encapsulated many of the concerns and motifs that you would see throughout the exhibition. What you behold is a transforming urban landscape, but really at the center of it are these two individuals, these daily wage workers, who have paused in their work to have a conversation. And what Gieve does is really ask us to really acknowledge them as people, them as individuals with an interior life. So they're not seen as laborers working or in a state of exhaustion or tedium, but really as individuals. And it really reminds us, as Ambedkar said, that at the heart of any political democracy is a social democracy, and a social democracy is one that is constituted by various individuals. So the exhibition would unfold loosely chronologically. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Barbican space, it is 2 levels. On the lower level, we have 2 large double height galleries. And on the upper level, we have 8 rooms, or as we call them, bays. So the exhibition began on the upper floor. And if we move to the next slide, here you see these are just some views that you would get of the lower galleries from the upper floor. Next slide, please. Another vantage point, and the following slide. And on to the next slide, please. So the first room you would arrive at on the upper floor was one that really set the stage for artworks that were made in response to the emergency. And the first work you would come upon is Speechless City by Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh, which is in KNMA's collection and currently on view as part of the incredible retrospective that they've staged of Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh. And what this painting did was that you see a landscape that is devoid of individuals or human beings. It has an eerie, haunting atmosphere. You see pigeons, cattle, dogs who are roaming around. And what it suggests is that has something terrible happened? Where has everybody gone? Or is something terrible about to come? An aura of anxiety, surveillance, fear kind of pervades this work. And I felt that it really situated or took you back to that moment of what artists who were very shaken by the suspension of democracy in 75. And then as you would go into the bay, you would see a range of other works of different tones. So you would have Navjot Altaf's posters, which were made for protest movements, or Vivan Sundaram's satirical drawings, Rameshwar Bruta's ape paintings that caricaturized the government. But then in balance to these works that were very overtly political in their response to what was happening in India at that time, I balanced that with works that were really about daily life. So photographs by Pablo Bartholomew, where he was documenting his friends, himself, as they would be, with one another, going out at night, dancing, having a party, and really celebrating, finding joy during difficult circumstances. And really, for me, it was this idea of joy as a form also of resistance. And so throughout the exhibition, there would be this move between works that address the political directly, and then other works that were very much about interior experiences, friendship, desire, love. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So moving from the first bay, which looked at 75 and the aftermath, the second room, we would be now in the 1980s, the early 1980s, and in Bombay. The works here by Sudhir Patwardhan, Geev Patel, Nalini Malani really looked at the changing landscape or geography of Bombay, really the question of urbanization and the place of the everyday individual or the laborer in it. So on the left, you see works from Sudhir Patwardhan's first exhibition in 1977, where he painted the everyday laborer with a sense of monumentality. And then by the 1980s, he starts to embed them within these larger tableaus where you see multiple narratives unfolding at the same time. So if we move on, please. So the third bay or room would then begin to explore this idea of social space and life lived in the street or on the street, and how in India, many different communities, groups share social spaces and how they achieve that, how they manage that. And so the two works you have here are of very different expressions and experiences of social space. So on the left, you have Gieve Patel's rather operatic painting off Lamington Road, which really, you know, as Gieve would say, for some people in India, the street is their home. And so you see a number of different kinds of encounters, from, you know, celebration and joy to destitution and disenfranchisement. And then on the right, you have a really dreamy painting by Nilima Sheikh from 1982 called Before Nightfall, which really was her, you know, expressing what she felt at that time, which was being a mother, going out in the evening with her children, and that transitional moment from night, and the sheer contentment she felt at that time, being a mother and her world being that of a woman who was celebrating motherhood. Then if we move forward to the next slide, please. Here are some works by Bhupen Kakkar, who was really talking about desire and sexuality, specifically queer sexuality and its place within the social spaces of India. So on the right, his iconic painting, Two Men in Benares, where he foregrounds this tender embrace between these two men, but within the holy city or context of Benares. And on the left, in a boat, you see a more polyamorous celebration of love and desire under the cover of night. And so if we move forward to the next slide, this room would then now speak to one of the thematics that I mentioned, which is gender and sexuality, but really specifically through the prism of female experience and really looking at gender-based violence at that time. So we had two bodies of work, one by Shiba Chachi, which documented female protest movements in Delhi in the 1980s against gender-based violence. And then Nilima Sheikh's When Champa Grew Up, which really looked at the story of a young girl she knew who was murdered by her in-laws and husband, but Nilima narrating that through the tradition of Indian miniature and Chinese painting. And then in the middle of it, this beautiful painting by Arpita Singh, where the space of dreaming became a mode of resistance. And so we move to the next slide. And here's just a view of the bay from within. And if we move on, please. Here we then move from, you know, the thematic of gender and sexuality to now urban artists point and time reconnecting with Indian village cultures. And so here we had three very different responses to that. In the center of the room, you have a series of bronze sculptures by Meera Mukherjee. On the far wall, you have works by Madhvi Parekh, and at the back, a series of photographs by Jyoti Bhatt, where he would travel around parts of India documenting disappearing traditions of ornamentation and other local aesthetic and art practices. And if we just move to the next slide, please. What you really see here is different modes of engagement with the culture of the village. So Meera very much going there, learning from artisans in Odisha and Bastar about their practices, and then adapting that to make her bronze works. But her bronze works really then being an homage and celebration of these communities, while Jyoti really creating this archive, this document of these village traditions that were changing and disappearing. And then Madhvi's works, which were very drawn from her memory of these aesthetic traditions that she would see when she was growing up in the villages. And then we move to the next slide, please. You have now another artist, Himmat Shah, working with an ancient material like terracotta and bestowing it with this incredible sense of modernity. And then in the background, you have a work by Jagdish Swaminathan. Now, Jagdish Swaminathan played a dual role, not just as an artist who was engaging with, the aesthetic practices of, indigenous cultures and then adapting that to his work. So painting with his hands, using, mixing pigments with soil, really kind of softening the hard edges of a kind of modernist abstraction. But also he was a cultural figure. He was the director of the Bharat Bhavan institution in Bhopal, where as the founding director, he did something which was quite radical at that time, which was to present work by artists working in rural contexts alongside artists working in urban contexts. So there was no artificial divide or segmentation between these two different worlds of making. And then at the right, you see we have Jangar Singh Sham, who was an artist who Jagdish Swaminathan and his team came upon, who was incredibly sophisticated in his representation of, the village traditions and cultures of Madhya Pradesh. And the final room, and if we move to the next slide, on the top floor, was really looking at some outlier practices that didn't really sit within more dominant groups. So here we have Krishna Kumar and the Kerala Radicals, and then Savi Savarkar on the left, who really was looking at the presence of Dalit communities and their plight. Now, moving forward, and if we could go to the next slide, please, and the next slide. As you would come down the stairs, next slide, you would move from the late 80s into the early 90s. Next slide. And here, really, the first body of works you would see were those which were made in response to the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992. And really, this event, which occasioned widespread unrest and riots and violence, also compelled a number of artists to change their practices. And so here you see a group of works by Rumana Hussain, who up until this point was a painter. And she really was very troubled by what she saw, and so started to work with the idea of the pot, or rather the shattered pot, in these installations to convey a fractured society, a society that had broken down, and also speak to a landscape of ruin. And if we move to the next slide, you'll just see a few more views of works from that series. And there in the background, you see a work by Vivan Sundaram called House, which again was talking about the pressures of violence on the domestic realm. And if we keep moving forward through the slides, you'll see Arpita Singh's My Mother, which again was talking about the violence in the street and then the locus of the home as a space of safety. And if we move forward, please, you will see Rimzan's work, which Deepanjana had shown in his slide, about, again, these implements of violence surrounding this figure seeking peace and stability. And if we move forward, moving into the back gallery, we then come to a group of works which really, again, contending with ideas of displacement and violence, are really thinking of it through specific groups. So here we have this glorious work by Nilima Sheikh called Shamiana, which really was a work that looked at the various roles and journeys and experiences that women take from mothers and daughters and sisters and lovers. And if we move through, you would see, once you were in the work, a work by Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh called You Can't Sleep, How Can You Sleep Tonight? Which again, querying that amongst so much social unrest, how could one sleep? And if we move forward to the next slide, Sheila Gowda, an artist who also radically changed her practice at that time, again, from being a painter to working with cow dung primarily, this material which has sacred associations, but then using it to draw attention to more secular uses of it, from that of it in village cultures to the labor of women. And then if we move forward, please, here you have a view back onto the galleries. We move forward. A work by Rimzan, which again, talks about the destabilizing of the realm of the domestic with a sword underneath it, speaking to kind of incurring of violence. And we move forward. Finally, a trio of paintings by Bhupen Kakkar, which again reiterating this idea of desire and queer sexuality within a shifting, changing national landscape. And then if we move forward to the next slide, the last suite of works of galleries really spoke to the shifting, spoke to 1991 and the liberalizing of the Indian economy and the effects that that had. And here you have a series of C.K. Rajan's Mild Terrors, which really satirized consumer culture and the influx of products from the West. And then the penultimate work, and if we move to the next slide, is Nalimani Malani's landmark installation, Remembering Toba Tek Singh, which really is this meditation on nuclear armament and how that becomes this recourse to divisions and displacements and partitions, and rather than finding solutions that do not lead to collateral damage and forced violence. And if you go to the next slide, finally, I wanted to end the show really on three works that brought the individual back. So Sudhir Patwardhan's construction woman washing her face, the simple gesture of washing her face imbued with a sense of pathos. Rumana Hussein's work, Is It What You Think, really talking about the experience of the Muslim woman and the ideas of stereotype and prejudice. And then finally, Bhupen Kakkar's Grey Blanket, which again sees these aging lovers kind of reaching out to get to one another. And for me, they became the mirror image to the two men in Giv Patel's work, where their act of reaching out together was an expression of solidarity and perhaps even hope. And so I know we're almost at time. So if we just move through the last few slides quite quickly, I'll just speak very briefly to the idea of exhibition design, which is that at the Barbican, we really have the incredible facility of working with, a different exhibition designer. And for this show, I collaborated, and we keep going through the slides, please, Apparata. And my brief to them was that I wanted to speak to the changing landscape of India at that time. And so the references I gave them were of modernist architects like B.V. Doshi, Laurie Baker, Charles Correa, who were developing urban housing projects. And so they really developed these beautiful these partitions, which were made out of brick and wood that evoked that period of change and transformation. And if we keep going through the next few slides, and also from a sustainability perspective, if we keep going through the slides, please, these partitions were then sourced locally and then the materials found homes elsewhere in England. And the other major kind of curatorial move, and if we keep going through the slides, and if you stop here for a minute, was that there was no interpretation on any of the walls. In fact, visitors got this guidebook as they came in, about 100-page guidebook. And really what I wanted was for visitors to encounter the works by these incredibly important artists directly, viscerally, and then have the interpretation in their hand, which then they could take home with them. And then lastly, and if we move forward to the next few slides, there was a catalog with 6 new essays, which is available on Amazon as well. And really the contributors really expand the ideas that the exhibition was exploring. And then we move to the next slide. This was some of the great press the exhibition got. And if we move on to the next slide, one of the great joys for me personally was that a number of the artists in the exhibition who were alive could come to the opening, and it became this reconvening of friends. And really, it was an immense privilege for us to be able to present their works to a local, to UK and international audience. And on to the final slide. So now with the Imaginary Institution behind us, we're looking forward to the future and our next partnership with KNMA, which is the series called Encounters Giacometti, where at the Barbican from May 2025 to May 26, we'll be launching a new space where we will be presenting Alberto Giacometti's works alongside the three contemporary art practices, Huma Baba, Mona Hatoum, and Linda Benglis. And all three of these artists have incredible connections with South Asia, Huma, of course, being of Pakistani origin, but Mona and Linda as well, having deep histories with South Asia. And to see their work in dialogue with Giacometti is going to be really exciting. And we couldn't be more thrilled to be embarking on this new exhibition series with KNMA. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shanay. I'd like to thank both of you, Deepanjana and Shanay, for your insightful presentations. I know we've gone a little longer, so we will have to curtail our sort of Q&A session, but we do have a couple from the audience. So I'm going to lead with that because actually the first question is posed by Griselda, and it sort of establishes a foundation for audiences that are new to this category, really. So she asks what books each of you would recommend to become better acquainted with South Asian art history. And are there any contemporary online resources, besides both your institutions, of course, that they can turn to? Shanay, maybe?
Sure. So maybe I'll maybe speak to two books that I think came out recently, which offer very different approaches to providing overviews of Indian modern and contemporary art history. One was the 20th Century Indian Art book by Partha Mitra and Paraldev Mukherjee, which is this large tome that really looks from an academic and scholarly perspective about Indian art history. And a complement to that would be Mort Chatterjee's book, Moving Focus, where he invited 50 curators, artists, scholars, each to pick 5 works that were really meaningful to themselves from Indian art. And then when you go through it, it becomes this very personal journey through Indian art. So there is this very kind of scholarly academic book you could go for, or then one that is really authored through the subjective tastes and loves of individuals who are part of the Indian art world.
Deepanjana, anything to add?
I think this covers it very beautifully. So I don't have to add, but we can always share lists via email. Happy to introduce them to
And
books.
I think a follow-up question from Sandhya Jain Patel, is there any bookseller you can recommend where such specialist titles would be available apart from the big bad boys like Amazon? We look forward to a KNMA bookstore very soon, I hope.
Yeah. I
That's in the
actually,
making.
I in fact always find a number of books on eBay. Actually, there are a number, and sometimes they're used as well, but eBay is a great resource to find some of the academic titles that might have been out of print, or some of the more recent ones that may be used as well.
Yeah, as you can see from all our backgrounds, we're bits of book fiends, aren't we? But I thought just to sort of wrap this up really quickly, Deepanjana, you really centered the importance of the audience and the changing viewer and visitor in institutions as a driver of the shifting landscape of our category of South Asian modern and contemporary art. And I was wondering if both of you, from your exhibition experiences in India and internationally, can give us maybe one or two anecdotal tales of how you've witnessed this impact and these changes via your audiences. And I think wrapping up on that
I
note would
can.
be a great idea.
Sure. As I had mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we were struggling, as we started the museum, we were struggling to even bring students into the museum spaces. And what was most gratifying is how our outreach team took it as a challenge and started going out of the museum. So it's like museum outside of these 4 walls, they created these mobile museums, going to schools, started introducing the programming, the arts programming into their curriculum. And the result we see today is gratifying. Any day of any weekday you go to KNMA today, it's noisy, it's full of children running around, and our outreach team is all hands-on doing workshops. On weekends, we have workshops. So you can see how that landscape is changing. And you have to start with the kids. They are our future generation of museum goers. So we are starting at a very basic level. And we hope that our new building is not intimidating in any ways to all these passerbys who will be going to the airport, coming back from the airport, the drivers, the just the locals. We want to be part of that community. We want to become part of that fabric of where everyone feels this institution belongs to them, and they should take pride in being a part of this institution, making a change in every way possible. So I do see that change.
That's amazing. And yeah, I think it's really important to start with the children. But Shanay, last word is yours. Any great story from your exhibition experience?
Well, I would say that, when we, embarked on putting this exhibition together and, opened it, we had a sense of, a community who would be engaged by it. And but then as it went on, we were completely overwhelmed by the number of visitors who started to come, who had never engaged with South Asian modern and contemporary art, and who hadn't any context or knowledge of the practices that were being showcased. And 2/3 of the works that were in the show had never been seen in the UK before. And I think it turned out to be an exhibition of revelations and discoveries for peers in the field, so curators and other art historians who really had no sense of the kind of depth of these practices, to I think another generation of younger diaspora South Asians who were not aware of these histories as well. And I really hope one of the legacies of this exhibition could be that there could be 30 solo exhibitions coming out of this one show. But if you want to ask about anecdotally something, I think something I found very moving was, I think it was the first Sunday of the show, and I'd gone in the morning, and I was just looking and observing, and there was this intergenerational family, grandparents, parents, and their I would say young, college going or late teens, all there. And the teenager was reading and guiding the grandparents through the show, and it was just nice to see an intergenerational family walking through the exhibition and engaging with it. And I can only kind of imagine their different perspectives on this history from 3 different generations. So.
Well, thank you again, both of you, so much for joining us this evening. Shanay, especially, I know it's very late where you are. We look forward to your future collaboration. Very exciting. Another whole new context to view and engage with South Asian art in relation to other artistic traditions, which I think is equally important. But thank you once again, and everybody, do remember to check out Asia Week New York coming up next month. All the information is available on the website. Thanks again for joining us this evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.